If the dollar is the strongest currency on earth, why are the people who print it quietly buying gold? That's the paradox nobody wants to explain. Central banks are hoarding gold at the fastest rate since 1967. Billionaires are converting cash into farmland. And on June 9, 2024, the most important economic agreement in modern history expired without a single headline. The common explanation is that these are unrelated events: portfolio diversification, normal market behavior, nothing to worry about. That explanation is comfortable. It's also incomplete. This isn't about conspiracy theories or doomsday predictions. It's about understanding a system that was built in secret 50 years ago and what happens when that system starts to unravel. To see it clearly, we need to start with a deal made in the Saudi desert, a disgraced American president, and a promise that changed everything. June 9, 2024. A Sunday. Most Americans were watching baseball, finishing weekend errands, scrolling through their phones. Nobody noticed. Nobody was supposed to notice. On that day, the agreement that made the United States dollar the most powerful currency in human history quietly expired. No renewal, no renegotiation, just silence. For 50 years, every single barrel of oil sold on planet Earth was priced in US dollars. Not because America produces the most oil. Not because the dollar is inherently superior. Because of a secret deal signed in Saudi Arabia in 1974. A deal so consequential, it reshaped the entire global economy, and so hidden it was kept from Congress for decades. That deal is now over. And here's the first question worth sitting with. If the dollar's position is as secure as they say, why did the people who actually understand the system start moving their money months before the announcement? Margaret Chen still remembers the exact moment her understanding shifted. It was a Tuesday afternoon late spring in her corner office on the 53rd floor of Goldman Sachs. Manhattan stretched beneath her window like a promise of permanent prosperity. 22 years she had spent managing sovereign wealth portfolios, the money of nations, the reserves of central banks. She had seen panics come and go. She had watched markets crash and recover. But when her screen lit up with the Saudi announcement, her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. The room felt different. The air felt different. Within 72 hours, Margaret had quietly moved $14 million of her personal retirement funds out of dollar-denominated assets. Not because anyone told her to, because she understood what the announcement actually meant. Picture that for a moment. A woman whose entire career was built on the dollar's dominance, whose bonuses depended on the system's stability, whose professional reputation required confidence in American financial supremacy. That woman looked at the evidence and decided to get out. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles from Manhattan, Marcus Williams was running different numbers at his kitchen table in Detroit. 31 years he had worked construction. Calloused hands, bad knees, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones. But he had done everything right. Saved every paycheck. Maxed out his 401k. $412,000 enough for a small cabin up north, enough to take his grandkids fishing every summer, enough to finally rest. Last month, Marcus sat at that table with a calculator and watched his hands start to shake. The purchasing power of his life savings had dropped 19% in just 3 years. Not because he made bad investments. Not because the market crashed. Because the dollar itself is bleeding out slowly, steadily, while the news talks about everything except what matters. Here's a one-liner worth remembering. The same dollar that built Marcus's savings is now destroying them. Most people get this completely wrong. They think currency collapse is something that happens to other countries. Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Argentina, places with unstable governments and corrupt institutions. America is different, they tell themselves. America is exceptional. The dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. But let me ask you a question that might change how you sleep tonight. What exactly is full faith and credit worth when you're $36 trillion in debt? When you're printing money faster than you can count it? When the countries that used to need your currency are building entire financial systems specifically designed to escape it. Elena Vasquez knows the answer. She learned it the hard way. Elena grew up in Caracas, Venezuela, daughter of a dentist and a schoolteacher. Comfortable middle class. In 2013, her family had the equivalent of $200,000 saved in bolivars. Real money. Years of careful work. By 2018, that money couldn't buy a month of groceries. Elena still remembers the afternoon her mother came home from the bank. Hands trembling, eyes wet, clutching a withdrawal slip for their entire life savings. The amount on that slip could purchase 3 chickens. Elena is 34, now living in Miami, working 2 jobs, sending money home to whatever family remains. She watches American financial news and sees the same patterns she saw as a teenager in Caracas. The same denial, the same blind faith, the same absolute certainty that it can't happen here. Americans think they're different. She told me, her voice flat with exhaustion. That's exactly what we thought. Now consider the contrast. While Marcus watches his wealth evaporate and Elena relives her nightmares, someone else is getting richer. Viktor Petrov runs a mid-sized aluminum export business outside Moscow. Nothing fancy. 60 employees, aging Soviet-era factory equipment, the kind of operation that should have been crushed by Western sanctions. But Viktor saw something coming back in 2014. When sanctions hit Russia, he watched his government dump nearly all of its dollar reserves and start stockpiling gold like the apocalypse was approaching. He thought they were paranoid. He thought they were overreacting. He was wrong. Today, Viktor conducts business in Chinese yuan, Indian rupees, even barter arrangements for Turkish machinery. His company's revenue is up 34% since he stopped depending on dollars. While American savers watch their futures shrink, Viktor is quietly building his. Why? Because he stopped believing in the dollar before the dollar stopped believing in itself. Picture a chart showing global dollar reserves over the past 2 decades. In the year 2000, 73% of all foreign exchange reserves held by central banks worldwide were in US dollars. Tokyo, Berlin, Sao Paulo, Beijing, they all kept dollars locked away like sacred treasure. Today, that number has crashed below 55%. Picture that line falling year after year while the news insists everything is fine. That's not a dip. That's not a correction. That's a slow-motion collapse happening in plain sight. Here's the second question that should follow you through this video. If the smartest money in the world is leaving, why are you still holding? The dominoes are already falling. Saudi Arabia lets the Petrodollar agreement expire. BRICS nations build alternative payment systems. China reduces its treasury holdings by $300 billion. Each domino hits the next. And somewhere at the end of that chain, invisible until it's too late, is your savings account, your paycheck, your ability to buy groceries next year. But understanding what's happening now requires understanding how it started. How did a single currency become so powerful that the entire world had no choice but to use it? What deal was made in the Saudi desert, and what did America promise in return? The answer involves a desperate president, a shadowy diplomat, and a handshake that traded military protection for monetary dominance. That story begins on a hot August night in 1971, when Richard Nixon looked into a television camera and told the biggest economic lie in American history. That story begins on a hot August night in 1971, when Richard Nixon looked into a television camera and told the biggest economic lie in American history. August 15, 1971. A Sunday evening. Most Americans were watching Bonanza reruns or finishing weekend barbecues. They had no idea that in the next 15 minutes, the entire foundation of their financial lives was about to be demolished. Richard Nixon appeared on television, sweating slightly under the studio lights. His voice was calm, almost paternal. He announced what he called a temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility to gold. Picture the scene: a president already drowning in Vietnam War, costs already hemorrhaging political credibility, looking into the camera and telling 70 million Americans that a promise their government had made since 1944, that every $35 could be exchanged for 1 ounce of gold, was over. Just like that. Temporary, he said. That was 54 years ago. The temporary suspension never ended. Harold Jennings was 38 years old that night, a currency trader at Chase Manhattan Bank. He was eating dinner with his wife when Nixon came on screen. By the time the speech ended, his fork was still frozen in midair, suspended somewhere between the plate and his mouth. "I knew immediately," he told interviewers decades later. "Every rule we understood about money was suddenly meaningless. The whole game had changed, and most people watching had no idea what they'd just witnessed." Here's what most people get completely wrong about that night. They think Nixon broke the system. He didn't. He revealed that the system was already broken. America had been printing dollars far beyond its gold reserves for years. The Vietnam War was expensive. The Great Society programs were expensive. And rather than raise taxes or cut spending, the government simply printed more money. Foreign governments knew it. France had been demanding gold for their dollars, physically draining Fort Knox. Britain was preparing to do the same. By the summer of 1971, America's gold reserves had fallen to less than half of what was needed to back the dollars already in circulation. Nixon didn't close the gold window because he wanted to. He closed it because there wasn't enough gold left to keep the lie going. Think about it like this. Imagine you run a small business, and for years you've been paying suppliers with IOUs. Those IOUs are valuable because everyone knows you have a safe full of cash backing them up. Then one day you make an announcement, "Actually, the safe is almost empty. But keep accepting my IOUs anyway. Trust me." How long before your suppliers find someone else to work with? That's exactly where America stood in August 1971. The dollar was suddenly just paper, a promise backed by nothing except faith. And in the world of international finance, faith has a very short shelf life. The first question that should echo through this section: if America could break its most sacred financial promise overnight, what promise is actually safe? Robert Nakamura was a junior economist at the Bank of Japan in 1971. He remembers the cable arriving from Washington, remembers the confusion spreading through the office like smoke. Japan held billions in dollar reserves, money they had earned through exports, money they believed was as good as gold. Overnight, those reserves became worth whatever America decided they were worth. "We felt betrayed," Nakamura said in a rare interview years later. But more than that, we felt foolish. We had trusted a system controlled entirely by someone else. Now America faced an existential problem. Without gold backing, why would anyone accept dollars? Why would Germany or Japan or Saudi Arabia hold green paper printed by a government that had just admitted it couldn't honor its promises? The dollar needed a new foundation, a new reason for the world to keep using it. Enter Henry Kissinger. What happened next is one of the most consequential backroom deals in human history, and you probably never learned about it in school. It was hidden from the public, hidden from Congress, hidden from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions. In 1974, Kissinger flew to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, with a proposal so audacious it bordered on either genius or madness. The deal was elegantly simple. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, would agree to price all of their oil exclusively in US dollars. Every barrel, no exceptions. No euros, no yen, no gold, only dollars. In exchange, America would provide unlimited military protection to the Saudi royal family, sell them the most advanced weapons on Earth, and guarantee their survival against regional enemies. William Simon, the Treasury Secretary, who helped negotiate the terms, later described the atmosphere in those meetings. Tense. Secretive. Both sides understood they were creating something unprecedented, a financial arrangement that would reshape global power for generations. The Saudis wanted security. America wanted monetary dominance. The handshake that sealed the deal wasn't just an oil agreement. It was the birth certificate of the petrodollar system. Here's where the mechanism becomes important. Picture global oil trade as a massive river flowing constantly, trillions of dollars per year. Once Saudi Arabia agreed to price oil exclusively in dollars, every country that needed oil, which was every country on Earth, suddenly needed dollars. Japan needed dollars to buy Saudi oil. Germany needed dollars. Brazil needed dollars. China needed dollars. The demand was built into the system itself. And here's the twist that nobody talks about: America could now print money, essentially without consequence. Think about it. Under the gold standard, if America printed too much money, other countries could demand gold for their dollars and drain the treasury. That's exactly what France did. But under the petrodollar system, there was no such check. America could print as many dollars as it wanted, and the world had no choice but to absorb them. Because the world needed oil, and oil required dollars. Remember Margaret Chen from Part 1, the Goldman Sachs executive who moved $14 million out of dollar assets within 72 hours of the Saudi announcement. She understood this mechanism intimately. Her entire career was built on it. The petrodollar wasn't just about oil, she explained. It was about creating captive demand. Every country on Earth was forced to hold dollars, forced to buy American debt, forced to fund American spending. It was the most elegant financial trap ever designed. Here's a one-liner worth remembering. The petrodollar didn't make America rich because of oil. It made America rich because of everyone else's need for oil. The system worked beautifully for decades. Foreign countries earned dollars through trade. They used those dollars to buy oil. The excess dollars flowed back to America as investments in treasury bonds. America got cheap financing for its deficits. Other countries got the oil they needed. The Saudis got military protection. Everyone seemed to win. But the system had a hidden flaw. A flaw that would take 50 years to fully reveal itself. James Foster spent 34 years at the Federal Reserve, eventually rising to a senior policy position. He was there during the 80s when the system seemed invincible, there during the 90s when America declared the end of history, there during the 2008 crisis when the cracks first became visible. Now retired, living quietly in Virginia, he speaks carefully about what he witnessed. "We always knew it couldn't last forever," Foster told me, stirring a coffee he barely touched. A system where one country prints the money and everyone else absorbs the inflation. That only works as long as everyone else agrees to play along. The moment they stop agreeing, the whole thing unwinds. The question that should follow you into the next section. What happens when the countries holding trillions of your currency decide they don't want to play anymore? For 50 years, no major oil producer dared challenge the system. Not because they loved America, because they saw what happened to those who tried. The petrodollar wasn't just protected by economic incentives. It was protected by something far more persuasive. And that's where this story takes its darkest turn. For 50 years, no major oil producer dared challenge the petrodollar system. Not because they loved America, because they saw what happened to those who tried. The petrodollar wasn't just protected by economic incentives, it was protected by something far more persuasive. And that's where this story takes its darkest turn. In November 2000, Saddam Hussein made an announcement that barely registered in American news. Iraq would no longer accept US dollars for its oil exports. Instead, they would price their oil in euros. It sounded like a minor bureaucratic decision. It was a declaration of war against the entire financial architecture of American power. Think about what that meant. If Iraq successfully switched to euros, other countries might follow. If enough countries followed, the artificial demand for dollars would collapse. America's ability to print money without consequence would end. The entire mechanism that Kissinger built in the Saudi desert would unravel. 2 years later, Iraq was invaded. The official story was weapons of mass destruction. You remember the presentations, the satellite photos, the confident assertions. No weapons were ever found. But here's what you may not have noticed. One of the first actions of the Coalition Provisional Authority after taking control of Iraq was switching Iraqi oil sales back to dollars. The weapons might have been imaginary. The threat to the dollar was very real. Faisal al-Rashid was a mid-level official at the Iraqi oil ministry in 2002. He remembers the conversations in the months before the invasion, remembers the quiet pride among colleagues that Iraq was charting an independent course. "We thought we were making a smart economic decision," he told journalists years later from his exile in Jordan. "We didn't understand that the currency you price oil in isn't economics, it's geopolitics, and geopolitics is settled with bombs." Here's the first question that should disturb you. If Iraq was invaded for threatening the dollar, what does that tell you about how important this system really is? But Iraq wasn't the only example, and this is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. In 2009, Muammar Gaddafi proposed something even more ambitious than Saddam's Euro switch. He wanted to create a unified African currency backed by gold, a gold dinar, that would be used to price African oil exports. Picture a map of Africa, the entire continent potentially moving away from the dollar, creating their own monetary system outside American control. Gaddafi began lobbying other African nations. He was building support. He was making progress. In 2011, Libya was bombed into chaos. Gaddafi was killed. The gold dinar died with him. The official story was humanitarian intervention, protecting civilians from a dictator. But leaked emails from Hillary Clinton's State Department revealed something more interesting: explicit concern about Gaddafi's gold currency plan and its threat to French and American financial interests in Africa. The humanitarian story was real. It just wasn't the complete story. Here's a one-liner worth sitting with. The dollar isn't defended by economists. It's defended by aircraft carriers. Now pause for a moment and consider what we're actually discussing. Two leaders who threatened to price oil in something other than dollars. Both removed from power. Both countries destroyed. Coincidence is a comforting word. Pattern is more accurate. Most people get this completely wrong. They think American military intervention is about democracy, human rights, fighting terrorism. Sometimes it is. But underneath those narratives, there's always a financial calculation. Which countries threaten the dollar? Which countries are building alternative systems? The map of American military presence correlates almost perfectly with the map of dollar protection. That's not conspiracy theory. That's observable fact. Amira Hassan was 17 years old in Tripoli when the bombs started falling. Her father ran a small import business. Her mother taught primary school. They had a comfortable apartment, a car, plans for Amira to attend university in Egypt. Within 6 months, their apartment was rubble. Her father's business was gone. Her mother's school was closed. Amira spent 3 years in a refugee camp in Tunisia before making it to Italy. She's 29 now, working as a cleaner in Milan, sending money to relatives scattered across 3 continents. She has never heard of the gold dinar. She has no idea why her life was destroyed. That disconnect between the people who make these decisions and the people who pay for them is the rage moment at the heart of this story. Picture 2 images side by side. On the left, a conference room in Washington where officials discuss currency threats and strategic options over coffee and pastries. On the right, Amira's family running through streets lit by explosions. The people in that conference room went home to their families that night. Amira's family lost everything, and the system that created both realities continues running invisible, unaccountable, protected by the very power it generates. Here's the second question worth asking. How many lives is dollar dominance worth? But here's the twist that changes everything. For 50 years, the threat of military force was enough. No major oil producer seriously challenged the system after seeing what happened to Iraq and Libya. The petrodollar seemed permanent, unchallengeable, built to last forever. Then something shifted. Remember Viktor Petrov from Part 1. The Russian aluminum exporter who stopped believing in the dollar before it stopped believing in itself. His government saw the pattern too. After watching Iraq and Libya, Russia began preparing for a different kind of war. Starting in 2014, they systematically dumped their dollar reserves. They stockpiled gold. They built alternative payment systems with China. They prepared for sanctions they knew were coming. When those sanctions arrived in 2022, Russia was ready. They demanded payment for natural gas in rubles. They redirected oil exports to India and China, settling in yuan and rupees. The sanctions that were supposed to collapse their economy instead revealed something the West didn't want to see. The dollar's grip was weaker than anyone thought. Richard Thornton served in the Treasury Department during the original Petrodollar negotiations in 1974. He's 87 now, one of the last living witnesses to how the system was built. When I asked him about Russia's successful evasion of dollar sanctions, he was quiet for a long moment. "We always assumed everyone needed us more than we needed them," he finally said. That was true for 50 years. It might not be true anymore. And then came June 9, 2024. Saudi Arabia, the original partner, the cornerstone of the entire petrodollar architecture, let the agreement expire. No drama, no announcement, just a quiet decision not to renew. After 50 years of exclusive dollar pricing, Saudi Arabia would now accept yuan, euros, rupees, whatever their customers preferred. The dominoes were already falling before anyone noticed they'd started. BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa announced plans for a common trading currency. They weren't talking about someday. They were building infrastructure. China reduced its U.S. Treasury holdings by $300 billion, the fastest reduction in history. Central banks worldwide began hoarding gold at rates not seen since 1967. Picture a chart of global dollar reserves falling year after year while gold reserves climb in mirror image. The lines crossed somewhere around 2023. Nobody put it on the front page. Remember James Foster, the retired Federal Reserve official, who said the system only works as long as everyone agrees to play along. This is what not playing along looks like. Not a dramatic confrontation. Not a formal declaration. Just a quiet, coordinated exit by the countries that used to have no choice. Here's a one-liner that captures the moment. The dollar didn't die in battle. It's dying from abandonment. And here's what makes this different from Iraq, different from Libya, different from every previous challenge to dollar dominance. America can't bomb its way out of this one. Russia has nuclear weapons. China has nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia is supposed to be an ally. The military option that protected the petrodollar for 50 years is suddenly unavailable against the countries that matter most. Margaret Chen, the Goldman Sachs executive who moved $14 million in 72 hours, understood this immediately. The game theory changed, she explained. For 50 years, challenging the dollar meant risking military intervention. Now the challengers are too big, too nuclear, too interconnected. The enforcement mechanism is broken. And once it's broken, everyone knows it's broken. The question that should follow you into the next section: what happens to a currency that was held together by force when force is no longer an option? The petrodollar system didn't just create American prosperity, it created American debt. $36 trillion of it. Debt that was sustainable only because the world had no choice but to keep funding it. Debt that becomes very different when the buyers start walking away. The bill for 50 years of borrowed time is finally coming due. And ordinary Americans, people like Marcus Williams in Detroit, running numbers at his kitchen table, watching his life savings bleed out, are about to discover what it costs. The bill for 50 years of borrowed time is finally coming due. And ordinary Americans, people like Marcus Williams in Detroit, running numbers at his kitchen table, watching his life savings bleed out, are about to discover what it costs. But here's what most people get wrong about currency collapse. They imagine it as a sudden event. One day everything is fine, the next day bread costs $1 million. That's Hollywood economics. Reality is far more cruel. Currencies don't die overnight. They die slowly, day by day, month by month, year by year. So gradually, that most people don't notice until it's too late. Picture a bathtub with a slow drain. The water level drops so imperceptibly you don't feel it changing. But it's dropping. And eventually, you're sitting in an empty tub wondering where everything went. That's the dollar right now. And the people who understand this are already positioning themselves on the right side of history. Let me show you two trajectories. Two lives. Same starting point. Radically different outcomes. Marcus Williams, the Detroit construction worker. We met at the beginning, retired in 2023, with $412,000 in his 401k. He did everything the financial advisors told him. Diversified portfolio. Mostly U.S. stocks and bonds. Dollar-denominated assets. Safe. Conservative. Responsible. Let's project forward 10 years. If the dollar loses purchasing power at the rate it has been losing it, roughly 6% annually, when you measure real goods, not the government's adjusted inflation numbers, Marcus's $412,000 will buy what $220,000 buys today by 2034. That's not a market crash. That's not bad investment decisions. That's the slow drain. Every morning, Marcus wakes up slightly poorer than the day before, and no alarm bells ring because the number in his account stays the same. The number isn't the problem. What the number buys is the problem. Now contrast that with someone who saw the pattern early. Sarah Okonkwo grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, watching her parents navigate a volatile currency her entire childhood. When she moved to Atlanta in 2015 and started her own logistics business, she carried that education with her. She never trusted any single currency. By 2020, she had diversified her savings across 3 currencies, 2 commodities, and real estate in 2 countries. When the dollar started its decline, Sarah wasn't panicking. She was rebalancing. Her net worth in 2023 was roughly the same as Marcus's $400,000. By 2034, projecting the same trends, her purchasing power will have grown to approximately $550,000 in today's terms. She didn't make better investments. She made the same investment in different containers. Here's the first question worth sitting with. Is the difference between Marcus and Sarah luck, or is it education that was deliberately never provided? The contrast becomes even starker when you look at entire nations. Remember Elena Vasquez from Part 1, the Venezuelan woman whose family watched $200,000 become worthless? Venezuela's collapse is often dismissed as a special case. A socialist government, corruption, mismanagement, all true. But underneath those headlines was a simpler mechanism, a country that printed more money than its economy could support for longer than the math allowed. Picture a timeline of the Venezuelan bolivar. In 2012, the exchange rate was roughly 8 bolivars to $1. By 2018, it took 250,000 bolivars to buy $1. By 2021, it took 400 billion. The zeros multiplied so fast, the government had to issue new currencies twice, knocking zeros off just to make the numbers manageable. Elena's mother didn't lose her savings because of bad decisions. She lost them because she was holding the wrong story at the wrong time. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody wants to discuss America isn't Venezuela. But America is doing exactly what Venezuela did, just on a larger scale and with better public relations. The United States has added more debt in the last 4 years than in its first 200 years of existence combined. Picture that as a chart, a nearly flat line from 1776 to 2000, then a hockey stick shooting vertical. $36 trillion. A number so large it has no meaning to the human brain. But here's what it means in practice. The only way to service that debt is to print more dollars. And every dollar printed dilutes the value of every dollar already in existence, including the ones in your savings account. James Foster, the retired Federal Reserve official who admitted the system was designed to protect itself, explained the mathematics to me with the weariness of someone who has watched a slow-motion car crash for decades. There are only 3 ways out of this much debt, he said. Default, which would collapse the global financial system. austerity, which would collapse the American economy, or inflation, which collapses slowly enough that people don't riot in the streets. He paused. Which option do you think they chose? Here's a one-liner that should follow you home. Inflation isn't an accident. It's a policy. And you're paying for it. The winners in this scenario are not difficult to identify. They're the people closest to the money printer. David Ashworth manages a family office in Greenwich, Connecticut. His clients are worth between $50 million and $2 billion each. When I asked him how his clients are positioned for dollar decline, he almost laughed. Positioned. They've been positioned for a decade. Real assets, international holdings, commodities, gold, art, anything that isn't a number in a dollar-denominated account. His clients aren't worried about inflation. They're profiting from it. Every time the Federal Reserve prints money, asset prices rise. The people who own assets get richer. The people who hold cash get poorer. It's a wealth transfer mechanism disguised as monetary policy. Now consider who doesn't have access to family offices in Greenwich. Who doesn't get advice on international diversification. Marcus Williams is still sitting at his kitchen table in Detroit, still watching the numbers, still trusting that the system will protect him because that's what he was taught. His $412,000 earned with calloused hands over 31 years is evaporating at roughly $25,000 per year in real purchasing power. By the time he realizes what happened, there won't be anything left to protect. The contrast is not an accident. It's architecture. Here's the second question that should disturb you. If both Marcus and David live in the same country under the same system, why does that system inform David and ignore Marcus? But here's the twist that complicates the simple villain narrative. The people running this system aren't evil. Most of them genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. The Federal Reserve officials who print money think they're preventing worse outcomes. The politicians who spend borrowed money think they're investing in the future. The financial advisors who keep people in dollar assets think they're following prudent guidelines. The problem isn't bad people. The problem is a system that rewards certain behaviors and punishes others regardless of intention. And the people who designed that system designed it to protect themselves. Richard Thornton, the 87-year-old Treasury official who witnessed the original Petrodollar deal, offered the most haunting perspective. "We thought we were building something that would last forever," he told me. "A system where America would always be on top, where the dollar would always be king. We didn't think about what would happen when the rest of the world caught up. We didn't think about what happens when you make promises for 50 years that you can't keep." He shook his head slowly. "I won't live to see the worst of it, but my grandchildren will, and I don't know what to tell them." That intergenerational dimension is perhaps the cruelest part of the story. Thomas Martinez is 31 years old, an elementary school teacher in Phoenix. He makes $48,000 a year, saves what he can, tries to do the right thing. If current trends continue by the time he reaches retirement age, the dollar will have lost an additional 60 to 70% of its purchasing power. His pension, assuming it still exists, will buy less than a third of what he expects. He isn't being robbed by criminals. He's being robbed by mathematics. Meanwhile, Thomas's landlord, a real estate investment trust based in New York, will see their property values rise with inflation, their rents increase annually, their wealth compound, while Thomas's erodes. Same economy, same country. Opposite outcomes. Here's a one-liner worth remembering. In a currency collapse, assets appreciate and wages depreciate. Which side of that equation are you on? The comparison with countries that saw this coming is instructive. Russia, China, India, Saudi Arabia. The countries building alternatives to the dollar system have all been accumulating gold and reducing dollar exposure for years. Picture a chart showing central bank gold purchases since 2014. The line goes almost vertical. These countries aren't buying gold because they like shiny objects. They're buying it because they understand what's coming. They're trading paper promises for physical reality. The countries that remain most exposed to dollar decline are the ones most loyal to the American system. Japan holding over $1 trillion in U.S. treasuries. European pension funds loaded with dollar-denominated assets. And of course, ordinary American citizens who were never told there was another option. The question that should haunt this section. When the countries with the best information are running for the exits, what does their behavior tell you about what's coming? The consequences are already visible if you know where to look. The cost of a house, the cost of food, the cost of healthcare, all rising faster than wages, faster than savings, faster than official inflation numbers admit. The squeeze is real, the drain is open, and the people who could have warned you chose not to. But understanding what's happening is only useful if it leads to understanding what comes next. The patterns we've traced, Nixon's lie. Kissinger's deal, the wars for currency, dominance, the slow abandonment of the dollar system. They all point toward a specific destination. What that destination looks like and what choices remain available is where this story finally arrives at the present moment. The patterns we've traced, Nixon's lie. Kissinger's deal, the wars for currency, dominance, the slow abandonment of the dollar system, they all point toward a specific destination. What that destination looks like and what choices remain available is where this story finally arrives at the present moment. Let me be clear about something before we go further. This video was never about predicting the future. I don't know exactly when the dollar will lose its reserve status. I don't know if it will happen in 5 years or 20. Anyone who claims certainty about these timelines is either lying or selling something. But understanding the system is different from predicting the future. And right now, the system is telling us something important. Picture everything we've covered as a single timeline. 1971, Nixon breaks the gold promise. 1974, Kissinger creates the petrodollar. 2000, Iraq threatens dollar pricing invaded 3 years later. 2009. Libya proposes African gold currency bombed 2 years later. 2014. Russia begins dumping dollars after seeing the pattern. 2022. Sanctions fail to collapse Russia because they prepared. 2024. Saudi Arabia exits the petrodollar agreement. Each event connects to the next. Each domino hits the one behind it. The line doesn't predict where it ends, but it shows unmistakably which direction it's moving. Here's the first question worth sitting with as we close. If you can see the pattern, why would you bet against it? The people who understood early are already on the other side. Margaret Chen. The Goldman Sachs executive who moved $14 million within 72 hours of the Saudi announcement isn't worried about what comes next. She repositioned years ago. When I asked her what advice she would give to ordinary Americans, she paused for a long moment. "I can't give financial advice," she said carefully, "but I can tell you what I observe. The people at the top of this system don't keep their wealth in the same instruments they recommend to everyone else. Draw your own conclusions from that." Viktor Petrov, the Russian businessman who stopped believing in the dollar before it stopped believing in itself, is expanding his operations. His revenue is up. His costs are stable. His exposure to dollar volatility is nearly zero. He didn't need to be right about the exact timing. He just needed to be positioned for the direction. Meanwhile, in Detroit, Marcus Williams is still where we found him at the beginning. Still sitting at that kitchen table, still watching numbers that stay the same while their meaning evaporates, still trusting that someone somewhere is working to protect people like him. His hands still shake when he runs the calculations. But now there's something else in his eyes, not just fear, resignation. "I'm too old to start over," he told me the last time we spoke. "Too old to learn new systems, move to another country, buy gold, whatever people say you're supposed to do. I did what I was told my whole life. Worked hard, saved money, played by the rules." He looked down at his calloused hands, 31 years of honest labor written in the cracks and calluses. "If the rules were a lie, then I don't know what to believe anymore." That resignation is spreading across America. And here's the contrarian point, that nobody wants to accept the system is counting on it. Your paralysis is their protection. The people running this system need you to do nothing to stay confused, to keep trusting that tomorrow will look like today. Every day you wait is a day they gain and you lose. But here's the twist that should give you something other than despair. You don't have to predict the future. You just have to recognize the pattern. Elena Vasquez, the Venezuelan woman who watched her family's savings become worthless, understood this before anyone explained it to her. The details change. She told me the last time we spoke. The currency names change, the countries change, the politicians change. But the pattern is always the same. Print money, lose trust, collapse. It happened to Rome. It happened to Spain. It happened to my country. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Every reserve currency in history has failed. Every empire built on debt has collapsed. Every population that trusted paper promises over hard reality has eventually paid the price. The timeline varies. The faces change. But the ending is always the same. James Foster, the retired Federal Reserve official who spent 34 years inside the system, gave me one final thought when we last spoke. Picture an old man in a quiet Washington restaurant stirring coffee. He's barely touched, choosing every word like it might be his last public statement. "You know what keeps me up at night?" he asked. "I think about all the regular people who trusted us, who believed that the Federal Reserve existed to protect them, who thought the system was designed to be fair." He shook his head slowly. It wasn't. It was designed to protect the system itself. And when the system's survival conflicts with the people's survival, the system wins every time. Here's the signature line that should follow you out of this video. The system protects itself, not you, never you. Let me leave you with a framework, not financial advice. I'm not qualified to give that, and your situation is your own. Just 3 questions worth asking yourself. First, what percentage of everything I own exists only as numbers in a dollar-denominated account? If the answer is everything, that's information worth considering. Second, if I woke up tomorrow and the dollar had lost half its value, what would I do? If you don't have an answer, that's information too. Third, am I making decisions based on what I see or based on what I want to believe? That last question is the hardest. Because wanting to believe everything is fine is human. It's comfortable, it's easy, and it's exactly what destroyed the savings of millions of people throughout history who saw the warning signs and chose to look away. Richard Thornton, the 87-year-old Treasury official who watched the petrodollar get born and now watches it die, offered the final word when I asked what he would tell young Americans today. "Learn history," he said simply. Not the sanitized version they teach in schools. The real history. The history of money, of empires, of what happens when debts get too large and currencies get too corrupted. It's all there. Every answer you need is already written down. You just have to look. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past. The dollar's reign is ending. Not because of bad luck, not because of enemies, because of mathematics. Because of patterns that have repeated for 3,000 years of recorded history. I can't tell you what to do. I can only tell you what I see. And what I see is a pattern as old as money itself, playing out in real time while most people scroll through their phones and assume tomorrow will look like today. Maybe it will. Maybe I'm wrong about everything. But consider this. The cost of being wrong about preparing is inconvenience. The cost of being wrong about ignoring is everything. The question was never if, it was always when, and the answer for anyone paying attention is now.